My view on fixed price contracts is that they are wonderful things and they work very well provided that they're well considered. The biggest challenge that I see is not kicking off projects properly. A lot of projects start, they want to see a hole being dug in the ground. They want to see something happening, a hoarding going up. They want to see stuff happening. So they push to get this job started. Invariably, it's not ready to start.
It's reactive.
It doesn't start with the most important thing, a good design. And that doesn't mean that the design will eventually be a bad design. It just means that it needs to be designed enough before you start.
Hello everybody, Gavin Coyle. I'm the Gaffer, back with another brilliant guest this week. His name is Joe Savage. And Joe is the founding director of Savvy Projects Ltd, which is a construction company, a dynamic construction company now based in Ireland. Joe has a wealth of experience across the world in working in construction, and he has a wealth of experience and knowledge to share with us today in terms of the challenges in construction, but also, you know, the lived experience of working on major projects, but also maybe working on smaller projects and how those challenges can be pretty much the same, but just in a different context. And we're going to talk about a lot about that on other things that I think you'll find really useful. He's got a wealth of knowledge, as I said, and we're going to take away some really golden nuggets from Joe's experience. Joe, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on I'm The Gaffer. Looking forward to this podcast, very much so with you.
Super. Thank you very much. It's good to be here and look forward to the chat.
Yeah. When you say to be here, you're in Dublin at the moment, I take it, is it?
Just outside. Yeah. Just outside Dublin. Yeah.
And so tell us a bit about your background, Joe. You obviously, at what stage did you get into construction? You stayed in Ireland for a while, I think, and then you travelled, or what way?
I got into construction. I'm the only person in my family who was ever in construction. I got into construction back in 1983. I decided for whatever reason when I was about 12 years of age that I wanted to be an architect. I couldn't spell architect. I didn't know what it was, but I wanted to be one. I knew they had something to do with designing buildings and I thought that would be good. I had a kind of a flair towards art and stuff like that. So I did technical drawing in school and as I went towards the leaving cert, I focused all my attentions on being an architect. I then applied for college to study architecture and they told me I didn't have any aptitude for architect, go away. So I didn't go away. I went to work for a architectural practice in Kilmechanic, where I was a trainee draftsman.
Okay.
Back in the days when they actually used to draw on drawing boards as opposed to AutoCADs and Rivet and all of the wonderful tools we have today. And so I worked there for about a year and I still had this niggling idea that I needed to get some qualifications. So I applied again for architecture. Back in Ireland in those days, there was Bolton Street UCD or Bolton Street UCD or Bolton Street UCD. There wasn't anything else. There was that was the colleges you could study.
It was ANCO as well, wasn't there?
Well, ANCO did it where more of a trades work experience type of thing, but they did. You wouldn't get a qualification in architecture or an engineering degree from ANCO. They were a stepping stone to finding jobs for people to some degree. So I went and I applied again, and again they told me that I didn't have any aptitude for architecture, and why am I wasting my time? How about construction management? Would you like to do that? We'll give you a course in construction management. So I went, I got to do something. I'm getting really old. I mean, I was like, 20 then at this stage. I mean, I was really getting over the hill and I decided that I'd go and study something. So I went to Bolton Street and studied construction management. It was a 3-year diploma course back in those days. They didn't have a degree course in construction management back in those days. If you wanted a degree, you weren't a construction manager. You were going to be a quantity surveyor, an engineer or something else. And whilst quantity surveying is a wonderfully exciting profession, it didn't really appeal to me terribly. So I decided that I would study construction management. So I did. I went full time to Bolton Street. Found money from all sorts of locations. Came from a big family, didn't have any money to give me to go to college, so I had to find it. So I did. Part-time jobs. I think I had 3 part-time jobs whilst full-time in college. And then I left college in 1985. Hang on, I got that now. Oh, yeah, 85.
Tough period.
And like everybody else in Ireland in 1985, what you did when you got a qualification was you left the country because there was no work in this country. I mean, I'm a firm believer that Ireland was in recession from the foundation of the state in 1922 to 1995, and that anything that was of any value was not happening. So I went to London. I had worked in London as an architectural draftsman for various different architectural practices, but one particular one for a number of years in the summer holidays from college. So I'd become quite good at architectural drafting and draftsman type work and surveying work. So my first role in the UK was to work for a company, an architectural practice, and I was doing surveys of grade 2 listed Victorian buildings in Knightsbridge and Mayfair and places like that, and bringing those surveys back to the designers to design them up. And those were the days when you literally went out with a rod and tape and you measured it up and you drew it up. So for the first year or so, I was working as an architectural draftsman because I was able to earn the maximum amount of money doing that. And I enjoyed it too. It was satisfying. You actually, something came out of what you did yourself every day. But I still had this niggling idea that I had this qualification in construction management. I wanted to use it. So I wrote 100 letters out to every top 100 contractors in Ireland. Those are the days when you wrote letters. You didn't type them. You wrote letters and you put stamps on them and you sent them in the post. And this is 1986, 85, 86. So I sent off and 3 came back to me, and one of them I went to work for was a company called John Lang Construction. John Lang Construction at the time were probably 3rd, maybe 4th largest contractor in the UK and internationally. They were one of the few that were international as well. So I went to work for them as a graduate engineer, setting out on site, pouring concrete and doing all of the stuff that you do in the initial stages when you're learning about your profession and learning about your trade. And I had a 2-year program with them, which was very unique because today there's very little training goes on in organizations like this. They expect you to come in and hit the ground running. But I had a 2-year program, and I was in every department with John Lang. And it was a very, very good and useful exercise for me. I suppose for the first 2 or 3 years, that's what I did. I set things out. Title was assistant site manager. I did concrete pours. I ordered concrete, inspected rebar. This is all that you do as an engineer. Then we moved into GP navigation, setting out using EDMs and all that kind of stuff. And then I started to get more into management. I worked in their homes division for a period of time as a site manager, and then I became what we call a contracts manager. In different parts of the world, a contracts manager is a commercial guy who deals with contracts, but in this part of the world is basically an area manager for a contracting or a building company. So I was a contracts manager, and I suppose I worked my way up, and I was the area manager for Barrett Homes, East London, building tower blocks in the Isle of Dogs in the city of London. For quite a bit. I was building, I suppose in my region, I was building about 1,000 units a year over about 25 different sites as the area manager at the age of 32, 33. And then I was introduced to, I got a phone call one day, miraculously, from a guy called Liam Carroll. Liam Carroll would be known to some people here in Ireland, but maybe not to so many. He passed away a couple of years ago, sadly, prematurely. But at one stage, Liam Carroll was the largest property developer in Ireland. The first one to start building apartments that weren't social housing, and people thought he was crazy. But he called me one day while I was driving through London, and I didn't know him from a hole in the wall. I'd lived in London for whatever it was, 14 years at this stage, and he just invited me to come meet him. I didn't want to do it initially. I ignored him, and he was so persistent that I met him in a hotel in the Isle of Dogs. Spent 4 hours listening and talking to him, which was fascinating stuff. And he hooked me and brought me back to Ireland in sort of late 1998 to be the construction director of his property development company. That was struggling here. It had a lot of safety challenges. I think there was 3 people had been killed on his sites in the 18 months prior to my arrival. And he was under pressure to put a proper structured management system in place. And how he got to know who I was, I have no idea. But he managed to get me back to Ireland. And I suppose after the first day of walking around the sites, I had the biggest headache I think I've ever had in my life. There were some challenges, and that's an understatement of the century. First thing I had to do, to be honest with you, was actually shut down all the sites and then slowly open them up again with some kind of structure, some kind of proper management systems. And that took a while. I had all of the HSA inspectors in the Dublin region on speed dial. They were literally, they had it in for them, and some of them were venomous the way they had it in for them. And it was very, very challenging. I'd not come across anything like this before. But having grown up in the construction industry in the UK, I had a good grounding for what needed to be done, and we put the systems in place, the PSCS role. We did something very strange. We started writing construction programs and working to a plan. That had never been done before. It was quite a roller coaster ride, but over a period of 6.5 years, we restructured the business. We renamed it as well. We changed it to Daninger because, the Zoe development company, wasn't doing too well in the stakes of good customer relations. So, we had a big company, a big business growing. We had, at one stage, we were turning over as a contracting company north of 500 million euro, and that was 20 years ago.
Wow.
We had 30 plus sites on the go. I had more than 400 staff. We had 38 or 39 tower cranes swinging in the air, which we owned all of them. We managed that whole process ourselves as well. We had a whole logistics and plant department. And we were quite a big business growing in Dublin. We had some major projects, which such as the gasworks in where Google's headquarters are in Dublin 4. We had many projects. I mean, I went through an exercise when I came back last year, going through all the different sites that we did, and I drove around Dublin, took photographs of them all, and it took me 2 days to drive around and get photographs of all the stuff that I'd been involved with the management, because of course you don't do anything and everything yourself. You're a team of people, but I was the lead, and it was some of the stuff I wouldn't put on a website these days, because they haven't stood the test of time in terms of the elevational facade treatments. Some of the renders look woeful now, that they haven't been maintained by the owners of the projects. But there's some fairly landmark projects that I've built with the team over the years. I then went to work for another tier 1 contractor here in Ireland who offered me a role as a regional director in Dublin, and I was with them for basically until the subprime wave came across the Atlantic and hit us in 2008, when the world literally fell apart.
Yeah. Tell me this, Joe, the construction director. I'm interested to find out, that would have been that role, or the name of that role wouldn't have been heard of back in that day.
There were 2 types of businesses in the construction industry in Ireland, and there still are, but there was property developers who built their own stuff, and there was contractors. Contractors were a lot more organized, in the sense that they kind of had no choice but to be, because they had smaller margins. They were running things more in a more controlled manner. When I say more controlled manner, I mean Ireland back in 1998 was really only starting to get up on its legs and starting to work and starting to move forward. And property development companies didn't really have the management structures that you would see in the UK or internationally. They just didn't have them. They didn't understand what they needed to do, and their focus was on margin, getting stuff done and getting people moved in. That was their only focus. So the role of construction director was, it's been changed with times in the last years as well as what it was. I mean, today operations director or COO or that kind of a role, because basically what I did was I managed everything from the time the planning permission was granted. I managed everything all the way through to the DLP, which is the vexed liability period, which is maintenance at the end. All of that whole process, that whole workflow from the beginning right through to the end was under my remit, including the commercial management, the procurement, the design management. When I say design management, I mean there are people in the world, God love them, who actually believe that once you get planning permission, the thing is designed. Which of course it's not. The real design happens after that, and the technical design, or if you want to call it, the stuff that you need to use to actually be able to build from. So all of that technical design element was under my remit. The procurement of all of the subcontractors and all of the site, and the management operationally of all the sites, including health and safety management, that came under the remit of construction director. But the title has moved on, I think, since then, and the phrases COO or operations director or those kind of roles seem to be what people are calling it. But basically, I was in charge of all things operational within the group of companies that we were a part of.
And then when you went to the tier one, did you say that was a regional director role, or was it a director role?
That was a slightly different role in the sense that it encompassed all of what I just spoke about. However, it was a building contractor as opposed to a property developer. As a property developer, we had all our own work. We did our own projects, and we were in total control. We were the client as well as being the contractor. In the tier one that I went to work for, there was a little bit of both, because the tier one contractor that I went to work for also was a property developer, and I suppose the initial attraction for me was that I had considerable amount of experience in the full delivery of projects, including making decisions on the ground, and I had a lot of experience in residential, commercial, and mixed use property developments. And as a result of that, they asked me to come on board. But the wider role of that as a building contractor was that they required me to effectively go out there and find work and use the connections that I had with architects and quantity surveying practices and project management companies to find work and to bring it along. So business development and tendering and estimating became part of my remit for my region while I worked for that company.
But you would have been, I suspect that was in around the Celtic Tiger as well. You would have been coming into the Celtic Tiger era, were you?
Yeah, well, it's hard to know when it actually started. I know when it finished, but it's hard to know exactly when it started. But I think the Celtic Tiger sort of kicked off around 95, 96, and it fell off a cliff in 2008, as did the whole world. So yeah, this was all Celtic Tiger period. I mean, I love the challenges that we have as a country right now to be able to get up to this notional 50,000 residential units a year, when we were building 90,000 residential units a year between 95 and 2008, and doing it relatively comfortably. And when I hear some people say when I make that statement, and it's statistical fact. It's not something I just say. Some people say, yeah, but you were building little boxes then and blah, blah, blah. Yes and no. What we were building then was apartment developments. They required all of the challenges, all of the difficulties associated with building any project. They required all of the management notes and the understanding. They required logistics. They required utility services. They required all of those things. And they were built within the framework of what was it, Dublin City Council or whichever council's development plan requirements. So we weren't building anything we shouldn't have been building, but we were building a lot more than is being built today. Yeah. And for whatever reason, the commercial viability of building apartments seemed to work then, and it doesn't seem to work today. But that's a whole other conversation, I think.
Yeah. And so when did you obviously then went traveling again then after that, did you? Like in the 2000s?
Yeah, what I did was I still had a mortgage to pay, like a lot of people, in 2008, and the banks were not terribly considerate about the fact that the world had fallen apart. In fact, the fact that they caused it was irrelevant. They were there, and that was what was going on. And I still had bills to pay, so I had a family to support. So I tried for, I would say, good 6 months, 8 months in Ireland to find work. I did some work in London for some Irish contractors who were working inside the M25 as a consultant, trying to help them to rationalize, to put their businesses into a more viable position, considering that, you know, the world was not in a good place. Some of those were contractors who got into the property area and had personal commitments and personal guarantees on banks, and that didn't help them. That brought them down as well. And, you know, I worked over there for a while, didn't get a lot of money, didn't get paid for some of the work that I did. And you know, a lot of promises of how the world will be wonderful when everything's fixed. And, you know, to be honest, there wasn't an awful lot else to do in this part of the world with the skill set that I had. I even sat down one day and put together a spreadsheet, because you'll love a spreadsheet, on transferable skills that I have, on, you know, what industry could I get into that would utilize the skills that I developed over the years, the management skills, the other types of skills. And, you know, literally every industry had fallen, you know, apart in those days. So it was very difficult. So I got a call from an Irishman. Funny enough, I've had a call from a few of them in my life. And this particular one was a guy from Wexford who was doing some work in the United Arab Emirates, in Dubai, in fact. And he had taken on a role as a managing director for a company that had been around for 20 odd years in Dubai, an interior design and fit out company. So they did the full turnkey design of the ultra high end of the market, largely hospitality and trophy office type scenarios, and very brilliant stuff. You're talking about Carrera Italian marble, you're talking about very high end joinery, that kind of stuff. And he had taken on a role to do a similar thing to what I was trying to do in London, with a company that an Englishman owned this company for 20 odd years before the world started getting challenging. And he took over as managing director, employed me as operations director, and another Irish guy as commercial director. And we set about putting together a structure. So I went in 2010, it was by then, to Dubai, having had a career behind me at this stage in this part of the world, the UK and Ireland. And I went on to run a operations and department of an interior design and fit out company, which involved labor camps with workers in them, gypsum companies, joinery factories. It was quite an interesting ride and quite enjoyable. But again, there was a lot of commercial pressure, a lot of legacy debt with that company too, that wasn't necessarily transmitted to us at the time that we were employed, if you know what I mean. And we ended up, despite the fact that between us we grew the turnover 2-3 times what it was when we got there, we were still fighting legacy debt, and it became very, very difficult to win.
Yeah.
So that the boss of that company got arrested and put in jail for 10 years.
Wow.
It's illegal in the Middle East to go bankrupt. It's just illegal. You can't do it. So he went bankrupt, and I think he got out a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago.
Was he Irish?
Yeah, an Englishman.
An Englishman, yeah, because I think he was talking.
Yeah, he spent a bit of time in the Nick there, too much time, for the period of his life. He's 45 years of age when he went in.
So he got 10 years.
Around about that time, I got a call from a guy who was building a few palaces in Qatar, which is the state next door to the United Arab Emirates in Dubai.
Yeah,
or like Ireland and England to some degree, without all of that money. Although they say we have as much money now here. I went to Qatar and I took over a $500 million dollar build of a 40,000 square meter palace for a high net worth individual who had been the head of state of Qatar. And that involved putting the whole team together. It was a full design build turnkey project. We turned over 500 million in 2 years from a standing start. We put the design team together, which was 16 different consultancies. We put the schedule together, the program together, the procurement team, the commercial team. I had 38 quantity surveyors and commercial managers working on the project with me. We had design teams, we had logistics. There was 250 in total staff and designers based on the project with us, and we literally drove it through all of the different things. I spent half my life in airplanes, flying around Asia and Europe, looking at factories and doing the due diligence on procurement. And within 22 months, we handed over this palace to a very happy
individual. And so I think that just blows my mind.
One of the things I suppose that's important about that, from what do you do with that, is that I hear when I talk to people here in Ireland and in the UK, and I'm still doing a bit of business in the UK as well, I hear, yeah, that's all very well, but they don't do anything properly out there. It's they just get it done somehow and whatever, and there's lots of money. You couldn't be further from the truth, a statement like that. When I went to the Middle East and started working in those environments, I had to conjure up an awful lot of the technical, logistical, process-driven skills that I'd ever developed, because they were and still are streets ahead in terms of their structural organization, management processes, design processes, procurement processes, streets ahead of anything that's going on in this part of the world.
Yeah,
because what they've taken is the American Bechtels and and British companies and Western companies, and they've added clusters to them. I mean, basically the processes and procedures and the systems that they operate out there are streets ahead, and they're far more automated in terms of their ability to be able to come into this modern age in which we're now in, and live with the processes that are necessary now going forward, far more advanced than anything that was going on here. So one of the things that I got when I was out there, even at the ripe old age that I was when I arrived there, was a real education in proper process and procedures. And they talk about health and safety being, I remember the debate that was going on when the World Cup was coming, and, it's all very well, you're building stadiums, you're killing all these people. Couldn't have been further from the truth. That, I mean, I wasn't building stadiums, but the processes and procedures, the health and safety management systems were more American than they were British or Irish. And those American processes and procedures, anybody who's ever worked for in the Intel place in Leixlip there, and saw how the American safety systems and processes were taken to a level that we have never seen before. We were shocked by it all when they first came here. That's how things are built and organized in that part of the world. So the processes and procedures and the systems and the structures are streets ahead of what's going on here, and add a lot of value, and will add a lot of value going forward, anybody returning to the country.
I had some experience. I had an office in Abu Dhabi for a while, and I 100% agree with you that you would not be able to build some of these developments without proper systems and without the proper processes in place. It wouldn't be possible. There's no way
When you consider that we had, on the first palace project I did in Doha, we had 5,500 workers.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the logistics of just getting them in the gate in the morning?
Yeah, just even to get them to the toilet. Just
literally getting them in the gate. The time it takes to get them through their stamp, the whole 9 yards. I mean, it was all biometrics. Yeah. They all had their safety gear. Yeah. Everything was checked as they went through the gate. Boots, vest, glasses. Yeah. The whole 9 yards. Just think about getting 5,000 people in a gate in the morning, one gate.
Yeah.
Because we weren't allowed another gate because it was in a restricted area where rich people lived, and we were very controlled about that. One gate. The logistics of that took 2.5 hours just to get everybody into the site.
Yeah. Well, that actually brings me to a point, and it's something I picked up there a couple of years ago. When they talk about culture on a site, you can talk about the safety culture, you can just talk about the general culture of the site, but there's also a culture of a country that has an impact on the actual work environment. And what I mean by that, like when you talk about, the use of third world labour, which was needed in the Middle East, which is needed in the Middle East in order to get, they simply don't have the indigenous population or the native population to build out these jobs.
Or who want to work.
Yeah. Well, that's another conversation. But I'm interested to know from you, in terms of cultures, which culture would you say was the best culture to work under with all the different regions that you've been in around the world?
That's an interesting question, not one that has an immediate answer, unfortunately, as much as I'd love to be able to give you one. I think when I came to Ireland, it sounds a bit ridiculous because I was born in Ireland, grew up in Ireland, was educated in Ireland, but I was my career, like many Irish people, didn't start in Ireland because of the challenges with the economy of Ireland back in the day. But when I came back to Ireland in 1998, we were not in a great place in terms of quality of health and safety, or even quality of build, but we weren't in a good place. I mean, I'd drive down streets in Dublin City where literally the whole site was spread out to the centre line of the road with everything from blocks, stacks falling over and sand spread out, hoardings demolished, and people were building away,
Yeah.
So the culture, the safety culture back in Ireland in those days was I don't want to use the word third world, but it wasn't good.
Yeah.
And it took a lot of hard work from the industry, driven on largely by the Health and Safety Authority, I have to say, before it started to turn around. I remember this from a safety culture perspective. We were probably 3 or 4 years into our program for sorting out the culture and the safety in our organization. And I remember one day I was on site. I was on site in that gasworks site. It was a big site. We had 9 apartment developments on the go at the same time. And we also had the commercial buildings in the front where Google's headquarters are today. And we were building inside the gas ring. We went 4 levels down inside the gas ring. There's 4 levels of basement car park underneath that. And in order to do that, there was a fair amount of civil engineering involved and a fair amount of logistics, just getting stuff in and out of that hole. And I remember one day I was walking around the site, and I had the site broken up into 9 different projects, 9 different site managers or project managers, 9 different everything. And logistically, we were hitting all 9, including the infrastructure works at the same time. And I remember very clearly I was walking with my project manager who was overviewing the whole project, and we were walking around one day, and we hadn't quite walked around the corner. We were standing talking about something, pointing at something, whatever. And I remember hearing in the back of my head or behind me, I remember hearing around the corner, we couldn't see this, but hearing around the corner, these 2 guys chatting away. There were 2 bricklayers up on a trellis, which I know people don't use anymore, but back in those days, it was perfectly legal and perfectly acceptable.
Yeah.
And they were up on a trellis anyway, and they were laying blocks. And then one guy jumped down, and when he jumped down, his hard hat fell off his head. He just jumped off the trestle or came down. And he started to walk over to get something from somewhere else across the site. And the other guy turns around to him and goes, your hat, put your hat on. And he turns around, I'm only going here. He says, don't care, put your hat on. And that gave me kind of like a warm, fuzzy feeling that we were winning. You were getting somewhere here. It wasn't anybody from my management team or me. And they didn't see anybody. They got into that culture of doing it correctly. And that spread into quality of work. It spread into a lot of other things. It wasn't just safety. I mean,
yeah.
I'm a firm believer, and I've always been a firm believer, that you don't do one thing right and other things wrong. You either do it all right or you don't do anything right. And the culture of the attitude of driving health and safety drives quality, drives a system, drives a way of operating that makes mostly everything you do well if you think the right way about safety. But the culture in I mean, I've worked in Morocco, I've worked in Maldives, I've worked in Qatar, I've worked in Dubai, I've worked in the UK, worked here, worked in France. So to my mind, the culture I mean, we're in a construction business, so we're talking about a culture on projects. We're talking about the culture around projects and the culture and attitude around people on projects.
Yeah, behaviors.
And to my mind, the nation and the place does not drive the culture of what you do. What drives of what you do is you and people. And if you, the leader of a project or a company, have a safety culture or a quality culture or an organizational culture or any kind of culture that is positive and helps to develop and grow people in a conscious and in a positive way, then that's the culture that goes wherever you go. Yeah. And I think culture is driven by people. I mean, not necessarily by, to be honest with you, most countries that I've worked in, they have rules, they have regulations, they have laws. But outside of maybe the UK and Ireland and so I suppose the Western world, the European countries, they don't really enforce them. They only enforce them if something goes wrong. If there's an accident on a site in the Middle East, the police come and arrest you. They throw you in jail and then they figure it out. They don't even ask any questions, just arrest you. Usually, when I say an accident, I'm talking about a fatality or something. Thankfully, I've never had, touch wood, I've never had a fatality or anything of that significant on a project that I've worked on, largely because I just couldn't sleep at night if I was to allow a situation to develop where that could happen. So I do give myself some credit for that, but also the team of people that you have around you. So I think the culture is in you. The culture is in the person. It's in the individual, and it's about character. A lot of countries don't. I mean, to be honest with you, when I was working in that part of the world, they didn't really care whether you had equality, as long as you didn't bother them. My attitude towards that was that I cared because I grew up in an environment. I created a situation in Ireland here when I worked for Daninger that developed a safety culture, which went into a quality culture, a management culture, all of those things together. Because you don't do one thing right, as I said before.
But what I'm hearing is, if it doesn't start with the leaders, it doesn't trickle down to the grassroots.
100%. And if he doesn't keep it going, I suppose safety, quality, management, attitude towards management, all of that, it's a bit like bathing. If you don't reinforce it regularly, you stink.
Yeah. But consistency is everything. And if you're inconsistent with your thoughts and with your behaviors, people will pick up on that and go, yeah, he's all about the hard hat on Monday when you had a bee in his bonnet, but then Tuesday he walked right by me and never said a word to me about the hard hat or whatever.
No, of course. It's what did they say? Repetition is the mother of teaching, and I think that is the truth. But if you get the mindset, if you pick stuff up and put it away on a regular basis, if every time you go about doing a management, doing a project, doing anything, you have a system, a structure, an organization, you have a mindset towards doing it right and doing it in construction is a very, very simple business. It can be complex because people are complex, but it can be a very, very simple business. You make a plan, which was alien to some people at one stage, but you make a plan. You put stuff in a row, you organize the logistics of that, and then you just follow it. And when something goes astray, you fix it, or you use your experience to see ahead so that thing that could go astray doesn't go astray. You see the problems before they are. But it's a very simple system building something. You always start in the ground and build up. It's not that difficult.
What's your view on fixed price contracts?
There's a question. My view on fixed price contracts is that they are wonderful things and they work very well, provided that they're well considered. The biggest challenge that I see is not kicking off projects properly. A lot of projects start, They want to see a hole being dug in the ground. They want to see something happening, a hoarding going up. They want to see stuff happening. So they push to get this job started. Invariably, it's not ready to start.
It's reactive.
It doesn't start with the most important thing, a good design. And that doesn't mean that the design will eventually be a bad design. It just means that it needs to be designed enough before you start. And if you have a proper set of documents, if you have a properly designed project, now design is not the thing you get for planning permission.
Yeah.
That's schematic design. Design is broken up into, from where I'm sitting, various stages. There's concept, schematic, detailed design, and then there's what we call IFC, issue for construction, or more further detailed design, or shop drawings, or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah. And then
if you get the design developed sufficiently well at the beginning so that your procurement can be robust, so that the documents that you have from your drawings, specifications, and God forbid, bill of quantities, which nobody seems to know what they are anymore, and properly document a project, putting together a fixed price contract in that environment works for everybody because it's well considered. But it will not necessarily be as cheap for the client as they think. But if you end up in a situation where the contractor is hamstrung by the fact that the design wasn't right enough, he made all at these stages because he did the job, and then himself in trouble, and help the client either. So yes, I go on the understanding that, number one, they allow a design development contingency and a fixed price premium, and that they're properly considered, and then the client doesn't make huge changes. Lets you get on with finishing it. So from that perspective, I think they're good, but the way that they're kicked off in a lot of cases is not good for either the client or the contractor.
But would there be model specific for a fixed price as opposed to, I'm thinking about if you're doing a residential build, it might be better to not have a fixed price contract as opposed to maybe if you're doing fit outs, or if you're doing a commercial build, or if you're doing a hospital, for example, with the Children's Hospital. I'm just thinking, is there models where fixed price contracts are, it's a no-brainer, it has to be fixed price contracts? Or is it just down to personal judgment from the client and whoever's representing the client?
I think you've got two things going on here. You've got government contracts and you've got private contracts. In the government contract scenario, invariably there are decisions being made for political reasons as well as for those are being necessary and can very often be made by people who are not properly qualified to make those decisions. And then you've got private contracts. Private contracts, people tend to be put under more pressure to get started on site show some progress. I used to have that when I worked for Liam Carroll, because he was the property developer, he was the client, we were the contractor, and I was the contractor basically, and he was the client.
Yeah.
But as soon as the planning permission came through, he wanted to be on site. Now, he ignored the fact that you had to notify the HSA and do a few other little details before you could start. He wanted to be in there digging holes the next day, literally. And I kid you not. And invariably, the design was not developed because he had a design team in the office. So from an engineering perspective, we did all our own design. From an architectural perspective, that was farmed out to people like O'Matney Pike and a few other companies around town. But from the detail of the design, it was never there. We didn't setting out, but we were going to start on site. And there are a lot of clients who don't own their own building department who still feel that they want to get started and get it done now because time is money, blah, blah, blah. My experience has always been that if you take the time at the beginning to properly schedule, properly plan, properly program, properly design. Design is just another word for planning. It's nothing else. Because if you've already got the planning permission, the concept of the building looking all pretty and whatever it's going to be is already nailed. What you need now is the detail of the rebar schedules, the concrete and schedules, the this, that, and the other, the setting out, all of that is engineering, in my opinion. It's not even design, but it's engineering. So if you take the time to get that right, you'll build so much faster, and you'll value engineer as you go.
Okay. So it's your opinion that, from an arbitration point of view, it starts with design if there's an issue.
Always. If you design in sufficient detail a building before you start it, and the client doesn't make substantive changes every time he gets a different whim, or the market changes, which can happen, especially with residential. I mean, I've had situations where we've had mixed use developments where the client was, we're three-story underground basement car park. We built the Tala Town Centre next to the not the shopping centre, but if you drive down to the hospital there are two large developments either side of that road that leads you directly to the hospital. Those ones. There's three-story underground car parks there, of which part of on the right hand side there, part of it is retail, is a supermarket, and that supermarket client came on board after we built up the ground floor. And literally there is storage areas, and there's actually retail floor space subterranean. So we ended up having to take out 2.5 meter thick slabs.
Wow.
To put travelators in after we built it. And we were rising from first up, or from ground floor up, on the apartment developments above. So we went through all that process after we'd already priced the job and got it done. We were working on it. And of course, that is it's very time consuming. So there's a lot of costs associated with the time, but the actual technical element of actually doing that was very significant without demolishing what was above your head while you were doing it. So those kind of changes, those kind of substantive changes, which was driven by the market. There was an anchor tenant there. I mean, you had to do it. You had no choice but to do it.
Yeah.
But the conversations regarding how much that would cost were like we were putting a gun to his head and we're trying to steal from him. And it got very exciting, some of the conversations regarding that. That's what tends to happen. The contractor becomes this bad guy, this guy who's trying to rob you, and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. I mean, people talk about the children's hospital. It's very emotive, and I know it's a debate that's been going on for a bit. And to my mind, the children's hospital is a classic example of a combination of politics gone awry and misinformation, as well as a lack of understanding of how these things work. Politics being, let's be honest, we started that project because it needed started, and if the guy who signed off on it back in the day didn't sign off on it, on what was on the table, it never would have got started. Mm-hmm. So the value that was on the table at the initially didn't reflect what's built now, and was in a different period. I mean, it was decades ago at this stage. So you're talking about how do you reconcile that, and then all of the substantive changes that have happened. I mean, medical technology has advanced dramatically in the last 5 to 10 years. So that affected the build. It affected the timelines, because it's a turnkey. I mean, I've walked around that project now 3 times. Some friends of mine were heavily involved in the management of the project, and I visited it a few times, and I got a little bit more understanding in some senses than others. But to have that, to say that the main contractor there is been disingenuous in any way, shape, or form is not fair.
Yeah, no, I agree.
But not only that, I think this whole idea that contractors are making big profits and taking money unfairly is not true. I mean, I'm working in contracting. There's a lot of things the main contractor swallows. Yeah. That because he realizes there's no point, but it's not necessarily his fault that cost occurred. So yeah, it's a very emotive subject, and I think you got to cut the cloth to suit the project. Cost plus is a wonderful thing, but nobody's ever going to want to build.
I'll give you that. Yeah, yes.
Nobody's ever going to want to.
Tell me about Savvy Projects then. What is Savvy Projects? What do you guys actually do, and what's it all about?
When I came back to Ireland a year or so ago, I decided, well, not quite a year, but almost a year, I decided that I wanted to take a lot of the processes and procedures and the systems that I'd learned. I mean, I'm almost 40 years in construction management now, from that time in 85 when I left Ireland to now. And I've worked on managing companies. I've been the lead running 30 plus projects with teams of 250, 300 in all the disciplines from operational management, engineering, technical engineering, design management, commercial management, procurement, all the disciplines that go together for the workflow to get a project built. And I've also built mega projects around the world. One project I worked on was as the lead project director was a $1.5 billion palace project in Qatar. Turned out to be $1.8 billion because the client needed a few bits of extra stuff.
Additionals.
A little bit of extra stuff. Full turnkey projects where we put the whole team together. 1.2 million square foot the site was. Square meters, sorry, not feet. Square meters the site was. But the structures in running some is akin to running a business. There's a lot of businesses that don't even come close to that kind of turnover and never will. So the systems and structures that optimize each department and each flow is critical. So I've learned over the years, even after my years working in the UK and working here in Ireland, I've learned a lot about the correct operational structures that suit a small project, a company, multiple projects, or mega projects. And you cut your cloth to suit whatever you're doing. It's not as straightforward as we'll always do this and we'll always do that. Some things are just overkill for certain projects. But the fundamentals of putting the systems, the processes, and the people in place they're nailed. They don't change. Those fundamentals are people are the key to everything that you do. You can't do anything on your own. How you manage those people is the next key. You put the right team in place, the right culture in place, the right attitude with people in place, and you will always win. So I put Savvy Projects together to support the construction industry both in Ireland and in the UK. And having said that, I got people in Morocco asking me to come and have a look at a project. So when you've been around and you've got contacts, you get that kind of thing. And whether I do that or not is another question, but it's more about systems and processes and consultancy. So it might still be something I could look at. So in the UK and in Ireland. So the company has been put together with a view to supporting good, proper construction management systems and processes. And I'm looking at the moment, I'm working with a couple of my friendly AIs, and we're working on putting together a process, a system that would help support the architects and designers as they draw, to be able to understand what those costs are going to be. So a real-time cost as they draw, which is currently partially exists in the world, but not really there yet. But my main focus is to support the construction industry in Ireland. Probably starting with the clients, people who need support in how to structure projects, how to manage with contractors, with subcontractors, etc. So that's what I put that together for, and utilizing a lot of skills that are only really now starting to find their way to this part of the world, and those are systems and plans and structures.
Was it a consultancy based?
Consultant, yeah, consultants.
Not design and build. You're not going to go down the road of contractor. You're going to stick on the management side of things.
Well, there's a few guys in management and contracting as well. But
Yeah.
what I'm doing, I can't be all things to all men. I mean, I don't want to try to do everything. I mean, I've done everything. I've done everything, but I've done a lot of stuff. 40 years of management has seen me manage planning permissions, planning applications, cost valuing feasibilities for planning for projects, procurement of subcontractors, procurement of main contractors, managing inside the main contractor, and managing the whole process of multiple projects within a business, within a company. So I have the experience to understand, I suppose, from both sides of the coin exactly how that all works and how people think and how people work. But my initial intent is to look after, support contractors and clients to help them navigate their way through the process of getting something built and getting it built in a correct way and in a safe way.
Brilliant. A few curveballs at you, Joe, if you don't mind, because we like to do that here.
Go for it.
Knowing what you know now, what would you do different, Joe? It can be anything. It doesn't have to be business. To some degree, I mean, much as we'd all like to think that we're the masters of our own destiny and that we sit here and we plan it all out and it all works to plan, your 4-year, your 5-year, your 10-year plan. I mean, to me, anything more than a 3-year plan is crystal ball gazing anyway, especially in this world in which we live. What would I do differently? I would develop my man management skills earlier. As anybody who's ever been in management and managed people over years will tell you, that you go through the various stages of understanding how best to manage people. My first job as a site manager, the first job where I was responsible, nobody else, it was me, it was down to me, happened on a project where I shouldn't have been put in that position. Unfortunately, the sad situation was that the site manager had a heart attack and passed away. And they asked me to look after it, because they had nobody else. I was there with him. And I was 22, 24, 23, 24 years of age. And I decided, well, you don't need anybody else. You got me. What's your problem? I'm going to do it. And he sort of patted me on the back or on top of the head or whatever it was and walked off and said, if you have any problems, call me. So I ran this project in a place called Totton in Southampton in the UK. And it was a apartment development. And it had some houses as well. I hadn't a clue what I was doing. I went home and I didn't sleep for 2 or 3 nights wondering how I was going to do it. But I wanted to do it, but I didn't know how I was going to do it. So I decided that I wasn't going to even try to do it. I went on site and I got all of the heads of all the subcontractors together and all the foremen together. And I told them honestly, look, I haven't a clue what I'm at here, but I want to run this site and I want to be promoted and I want to be blah, 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 because I always wanted more. Mm-hmm. And what that did was it brought a whole bunch of people together and put their arms around me and said, don't worry, we won't let you down. We'll make sure it happens for you. And some of them took the mick, as would. And some of them kept an eye on me and kept an eye on the ones who were taking the mick and let me know what they were at. And I learned some valuable lessons. One of them was that you can't do it by yourself, and you're never really doing it by yourself. My job has always been, and since then, has always been to direct people to the end result. Yeah. As opposed to doing everything for them. No, but there's I think they missed the part there, if you don't mind me saying so. There's a power in vulnerability as well. And you were vulnerable and you used that as a weapon to support yourself. And that's
and a lot of guys put their arms around me. Some guys were coming into the office and saying, the way he said that in the meeting, well, what he was really doing was that and this, that. And I was able to circumvent that. They were gobsmacked. They couldn't understand how did I know that? Wow, this guy knows more than he thinks. And I suppose, what would I do differently? I wouldn't do an awful lot differently. I think I've maximized not maximized. I mean, there's no maximize, is there really? But I think I've utilized the things that have been sent in my direction or thrown at me, and I've taken and played the cards as well as I could, in an environment where the world was falling apart economically. I was able to go to the Middle East, triple my income and not pay tax. Yeah. I was able to learn a lot of skills in terms of how to structurally put together projects, mega projects with big teams, and all of which stand you in good stead. So I don't think that I would do an awful lot differently, to be honest with you. I mean, there's things in your personal life you could talk about, which we won't do there.
No, we're not a counselling session here. Favorite book? It doesn't have to be business again.
Well, my favorite book is kind of a business book. It's Atomic Habits by James Clear. It kind of I only read it about a couple of years back, not so many years back, and I've read a fair few books on management. But it kind of encapsulated a lot of, I suppose, my own thoughts on how best to do things. I've always been a fan of the idea that, you can have all the plans in 2 to 5 years from now. I'm going to be this and I'm going to do that. And here's my program of work and here's all of this kind of thing. And you've heard the phrase, men make plans and God laughs. And to be honest with you, it's usually, I always found out whenever I made a plan, that's exactly the opposite was going to actually happen when I made that plan. And but what I discovered without articulating it the way James Clear does in that book is that getting into a system of habits, small habits over a period of time, they build up to something much more powerful and much more robust. Simple things, exercise, eating healthy, all the things that have become the buzz of the last number of years for people. But in business, getting up early, getting ahead of I've been an early riser all my career. It started with the fact that I had to drive an hour and a half to 2 hours and start work at 8 o'clock in the morning. So it started like that. It didn't start because I thought it's great to get up when it's dark. But I did it. But after a period of time, I got the benefit of being there early, being ahead of the crowd, being able to sit down with your own thoughts and put things together. Being ahead of everyone, walk around a site, walk around a project, get your head into stuff before everybody else is awake. So getting in good habits, good small habits on a regular basis have, and in reading that book only a couple of years ago, it sort of encapsulated it. Yeah, it really resonated with me.
Joe, if anybody wants to contact you, how would they get in touch with you? What's the go-to for you? I know you're strong on LinkedIn, but, email.
I have a website which is Savvy Projects Ltd. I also have my phone number, which I take calls. I know people don't use phones for making calls too much anymore, but I take phone calls. People speak to me on my phone, would you believe? And my email, which is joe.savage@savvyprojects.ie.
Joe, you're an absolute gem. I really appreciate you coming on board today with ourselves. It was brilliant. The conversation could have went on for another hour. If someone wants to reach out to you, I'm sure they will. They'll probably reach out through LinkedIn or through the website. I wish you the very best with Savvy Projects.
Thank you very much.
I know from anybody that might be listening or watching today that they've taken definitely a few things away from your experience, and you've a lot to offer, and well done for all your service and construction. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It's been good to have a chat.
All right, Joe. Take care.
Cheers now. Bye-bye.